Hi everyone. In this video, let's go through a case study for gestational diabetes. And this is the DIME ADIME data collection form. So you start by writing dietitian, and this is the initial assessment. So this patient is 29 years old and she's a female, and she's a pregnant lady, and she's 28 weeks pregnant, which means she's currently in her third trimester of pregnancy. And the GP referral is because she was diagnosed with gestational diabetes at week 28. So we have her height details in centimeters, that is 157 centimeters, and her current weight is 72 kilograms. So that includes the weight during pregnancy. So that includes her pre-pregnancy weight plus the weight that she has gained during the pregnancy. So looking at the weight history, her pre-pregnancy weight had been 60 kilograms. Therefore, we can calculate the gestational weight gain. So now she is 72 kilograms, and before being pregnant, she was 60. So the weight gain that has happened during the pregnancy was 12 kilograms, and that has happened during these 28 weeks. So the gestational weight gain is 12 kilograms. So if you can remember, this 12 kilogram includes the weight of the maternal tissues, the weight of the fetus, and amniotic fluid, everything altogether, she has gained 12 kilograms. So now we have to calculate the BMI. So always we are calculating BMI considering the pre-pregnancy status. So for her pre-pregnancy status, we are calculating the BMI. So her weight was 60 divided by height in meters squared. So her height was 157 centimeters. So we get it in meters and square it. So her pre-pregnancy BMI was 24.3. And according to WHO cutoffs, that is in the healthy weight range. So for somebody who is in the healthy BMI category, the recommended weight gain is 11.5 to 16 kilograms, if you can remember. So if she was in underweight or overweight obese categories, this value, this recommendation would be different. So this is her recommendation, and she has gained 12 kilograms. So she is now within the recommended amount. So that's all good. And moving forward, we have some of her biochemical data, results of the oral glucose tolerance test, and these are the cutoff values. So the fasting value was 4.8, which is below 5.3. So with the fasting value, we cannot say that she's having gestational diabetes. The fasting value is within the target range. But when it comes to OGTT 1 hour, after 1 hour of drinking this sugar solution, glucose solution, her blood sugar value was 10.8, and that has exceeded the cutoff value. So because of this, she meets the criteria for gestational diabetes. And again, the 2-hour value remains within the target range, so that is fine. And also we have some other results from glucose monitoring, something that she has done at home, which is not the OGTT. So from this also, we can see that after 1 hour, the 1 hour postprandial glucose has exceeded the limits, which is if it's 7.54 or above, that should be categorized as gestational diabetes. So based on these findings, we can say that she meets the criteria for gestational diabetes. So I have given the references for these 2 guidelines, and these are the most updated ones, but they can keep changing. They get updated time to time. Then looking at her client history, medical history, she doesn't have a history of type 2 diabetes mellitus previously, but her mother was diagnosed with gestational diabetes and type 2 diabetes as well. She doesn't have a surgical history. Then going ahead, we have her social history. So it tells us that she is working from home and she lives with a partner, and this is her first pregnancy, and she has never met a dietitian before. And there is something we can know about her vegetable intake from here. She doesn't like the taste of the vegetables, and she tells that the vegetables taste bland when they're cooked. So she would love to learn how to make vegetables to taste better. And she's non-smoking, non-alcoholic. And some idea about her physical activity. She walks for 15 minutes on the weekends, just that. And other than that, she stays at home. So this is the only physical activity that we know about her. So this is her diet. And I have calculated the energy and the food groups: carbohydrates, free sugars, glycemic index, and glycemic loads for you. So for example, for her breakfast, she's taking white bread, 3 slices, and that gives her 900 kilojoules, and that would be sitting in the cereal food group, and that gives 3 serves of cereals, and that gives 45 grams of carbohydrates and 3.1 grams of free sugars, and that is high GI, and this is the glycemic load. So from where do we get these values? That is, you can get them from the handbook. So for some food items, these values were not there in the handbook. So for them, I used the FoodWorks to get these values. So then I calculated the total. So in here, the total energy coming from all the food items, I've calculated that in kilojoules, and I converted that into kilocalories. So divide that by 4.18 to convert it to kilocalories. And I've calculated the total number of serves of each food group, the 5 core food groups, and for discretionary foods. And I've calculated the total carbohydrates, free sugars as well. Going forward, we need to assess the estimated requirement versus the standards. So the first one considering is the current energy intake. So her current total energy intake in kilocalories is 2,746. So that is what I've written in here. And we know she's in the 3rd trimester. So to calculate the energy requirement, we first use this equation, which we use for non-pregnant adults. So that is this formula, 25 to 35 kilocalories per kilogram of body weight. And we take 60 kilograms because that is her non-pregnant body weight. So using that, we can calculate the upper and the lower limits of the estimated energy requirement. So we multiply 25 by 60 to get the lower limit and 35 by 60 to get the upper limit. So accordingly, her estimated energy requirement is 1,500 to 2,100 kilocalories. And that is if she was non-pregnant. But now she is pregnant and is in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy. So for 3rd trimester, we are adding a small amount, which is 452 kilocalories. So if you've watched the other videos, you might have seen that based on the trimester, we add a certain value, certain extra amount of energy when we are calculating the total energy requirement for pregnancy. So in here, we have to add 452 in kilocalories. So we add that 452 to both upper and lower levels, and this is what we end up with. So this is the estimated energy requirement that is calculated. So we take that as the 100%. But if we look at her actual intake, which is above the upper limit as well, so she's taking a bit above the upper limit. So we need to calculate the percentage. So if we consider 2,552 as the 100, and then if 2,552 is 100, what is 2,746? Which is her current intake. So that is 107.6, which means her actual intake is 7.6% more than the estimated energy requirement. But that is a little amount. So when it comes to kilocalories, that is about 194 kilocalories. That's a little amount. So that's not a clinically significant issue. Her energy intake in terms of kilocalories or kilojoules, that's not a significant clinical issue to be worried about. Going ahead, we are calculating the total carbohydrates. So from this table, we get the total carbohydrate intake based on her diet is 335 grams. That is what I have written here. And for carbs, AMDR is 45 to 65%. So we are setting that. And we need to calculate the energy that is coming from carbohydrates. And then from energy, we are moving into the number of grams. So when we calculate the energy, we are not using her actual intake, because her actual intake is higher than the upper limit. So if you see here, her actual intake was 2,746, while the upper level was 2,552. So for this calculation purpose, we are using the upper limit in this situation because her actual intake was exceeding the upper limit. So we are using the upper limit here. So we do calculate 45% of this value is 1,148 kilocalories, and 65% of 2,552 is 1,658 kilocalories. So now we know the kilocalories. So that then we can calculate the grams, because when it comes to carbohydrates, we know 1 gram gives 4 kilocalories. So we have to divide this kilocalorie amount by 4 if we wanted to get the amount in grams. So now we know by dividing by 4, the lower limit is 287 grams and the upper limit is 414 grams. And her actual intake lies in between these two levels, so that is fine as well. So her amount of carbohydrate intake, which is 335, this one is calculated from the diet, that lies in between this range, so that is fine. And we had another recommendation, if you can remember from the previous presentations. The IOM recommends a carbohydrate intake. They recommend that not to reduce the carbohydrate intake below 175. So they say 175 or above is better. And if it drops further, that would have undesirable consequences. So in this case, she is above this level, but there is no recommendation for an upper limit in the IOM. So we have to go with this calculation for that. Then I have also calculated the carbohydrate portions. If you go up here in this table, 1 carbohydrate portion is equal to 15 grams of carbohydrate. So I've calculated the carbohydrate portion, simply dividing these carbohydrate, the total value by 15. So I've calculated the carbohydrates separately for each meal, because if you remember, we need to make sure that that we try to divide the total carbs throughout the day evenly as possible. So to see that, I've separately calculated the carbohydrates for each meal. And similarly, I've calculated the carbohydrate portion separately for each meal for that purpose. So the portions, the minimum carbohydrate intake is 287 grams, which we have earlier calculated, and the maximum is 414.7 grams. These two we have calculated earlier when we were calculating the carbohydrates based on the AMDRs. So the carbohydrate portion, that is the minimum is 19.1. That is, we divide this value by 15 to get the portions, and the upper limit level is 27.6. So her actual carbohydrate portion intake is 21.8, which is lying in between these two values. So that is fine as well. That's not an issue. And then we will move on to free sugars. So based on this calculation, her free sugar intake based on this diet is 135.1 grams. So that is what I've written in here. And it is recommended to reduce the intake of free sugars to less than 10% of the total energy intake. And if it drops further below 5% of the total energy intake, that could provide additional health benefits. This is according to WHO. So we will try to see if it's 10% of the total energy intake, because that is the higher value. So looking at that, carbohydrate, the total energy intake is 2,552. We are using this upper level that we have calculated uh, for the estimated energy requirement, because her actual energy intake is a bit higher than the requirement. So we always use the higher upper level of the requirement, the recommendation for the calculations. So the recommended upper level is 2,552. We take it as 100%. So 10% is 255.2 kilocalories. So this is 10% of the energy intake in kilocalories. So now we want to see how many grams of carbohydrates can be there. So we know 1 gram of carbohydrate provides 4 kilocalories. So we have to provide 255.2 kilocalories. So how many grams of carbohydrate can be there? That is 63.8. So if we are trying to supply 10% of the total energy from carbohydrates, which means we can take 63.8 grams of carbohydrates. But if this woman is eating more than 63.8 grams of carbohydrates, which means the energy coming from carbohydrates is more than 10% of the total energy. So she's actually consuming more. So she's exceeding this value. So we need to see by which percentage is she exceeding that. So 63.8, we're considering that as 100% for this calculation. And if 63.8 is 100, what is 135, which is her actual intake? That is 211.8%, which means her free sugar intake is 111.8% more than recommended, which means if we consider that in grams, that is 71.3 grams more than the recommendation. So that is a concern. She's having free sugars higher than recommended. So her total energy intake is fine. So going back, just to recap, so her total energy intake was fine. I mean, that was just nearly 200 kilocalories exceeding, but that's not a significant issue. And when it comes to carbohydrates, that is fine as well. So the carbohydrate quantity is fine, but there is an issue with the types of carbohydrates, because her free sugar intake is much higher than the recommendation. Then we would go further looking at the glycemic index and glycemic load. So in this, going back to the table, I've considered the glycemic index of these different foods that would have a glycemic index value. And based on that, I've just summarized in here that she's having 3 high glycemic index foods and 1 medium GI food. So these are the GI cutoff values. So she's having 3 high GI foods, and that is a concern. So usually it is recommended to have low or medium GI diets. This medium we can consider fine, but she's having 3 high GI foods, so that would be a concern. So she's having concerns with the types of carbohydrates, because she's having excess amounts of free sugars and high GI foods. And also I've calculated the glycemic, I've just looked at the glycemic load, and there's 1 high GL food item as well. So from that, it's clear. Just a recap once again, energy is fine, total carbs is fine, but the carbohydrate types, there is an issue. Then I have also assessed her intake based on the food group recommendations. So these are the 5 core food groups and discretionary foods. And these are the recommendations according to Australian Guides to Healthy Eating. And this is her intake. So going back to the table, this is how I've calculated the serves. As I said before, for each food item, I've just distributed that to the relevant food group. And in the end, I've calculated the total number of serves for each food group. And that is what I have brought to this table in here. So this is her intake and these are the recommendations. And once we make this table, we can compare the issues. So when it comes to cereals, she has exceeded the recommendation by just half a serve. And when it comes to meat alternatives, she is less consuming less, but it's just half a serve. And dairy also, she's consuming extra half a serve. That's fine. But when it comes to vegetables, we can see a bigger difference. The recommendation is 5 serves, while her intake is just 2 serves. For fruits, she's in the recommended value. And again, with discretionary, there's an issue. The recommendation allows to go up to maximum of 2.5, but her intake is much higher than that. Her intake is 6.5. So I've just highlighted the major issues that are there with vegetables and discretionary. So we have to understand the issue with discretionary could also be linked to the issue we found earlier, which is in terms of free sugar and high GI food intake, because discretionary includes sweet foods as well. So this some of these sweet foods that are being counted in here could be coming from sugary foods as well. So if we go back and see, we can confirm that. So when it comes to discretionary, is from sugar, that's coming from sugar, and that's coming from these biscuits. So yes, some of these numbers are being contributed from sugary foods as well. So we've identified the issues in terms of sugar, types of the carbohydrates, and in vegetables. Yes, discretionary is an issue, but that could be also due to the sugars. Then going ahead, we have to write the PEST statement. So we have to identify the problems. So the first problem, as I've been discussing, is the intake of types of carbohydrates inconsistent with the needs, particularly the free sugars, because as I said, the total energy is fine, carbohydrate quantity is fine, but when it comes to the types of carbohydrates, she's having high free sugars. So I wrote this as one problem. And the other problem could be either of them. So for discretionary, we could also fit that into the first problem, because for discretionary, there might be a contribution coming from the sugary foods. So for the second problem, I'm considering this vegetable. So I'm writing it as inadequate oral intake within brackets vegetables. Okay, now coming to etiology, NIS. So for the first problem, P1 is related to undesirable food choices. That is where I link the high discretionary food intake into that. So she's having intake of carbohydrate inconsistent with the needs is the problem, and the etiology is because she's making undesirable food choices like high discretionary food intake, which is obvious from here. And for the second problem, which is inadequate oral intake, vegetables, the etiology is that she dislikes the taste of vegetables and has little cooking skills. So if you can remember, that was there in her social history. She said that she doesn't like the taste of vegetables. The vegetables taste bland, and she's happy to learn ways to make her vegetables taste better. So that is the etiology. And the signs and symptoms for the problem 1, which is intake of carbohydrates inconsistent with the needs, high free sugar intake. So we can see her free sugar intake was this percentage more than the recommended, that is she's consuming 71.3 grams of extra free sugars, higher than the WHO recommendation. And she's having high GI foods and high GL foods. And also her glucose level postprandial at breakfast was this value. Then for the second problem, which is inadequate oral intake, considering the vegetables, she is not meeting the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating vegetable recommendation, as we have seen in here. The recommendation is 5 and she only takes 2 serves. Okay, this is done. And now we need to design the intervention. So the goal for the first one, I've written down 2 goals for the 2 problems. So for the first one, which is intake of types of carbohydrates inconsistent with the needs, free sugars. So for that, that is a quantitative goal I've written. Lower the intake of free sugars coming from discretionary foods by 25% by the next consultation. So 25% means the total intake of free sugars right now is 135 grams. Reducing 25% of that means she's allowed to have 75. This is 100%, but I cut down 25% of that. So she's allowed to have 75%, which is 101.3. And the second goal, again, a quantitative goal. By the next consultation, aim to gradually align the diet with the Australian Guide to Healthy Eating principles by increasing the vegetable intake by 50%. So the current vegetable intake is just 2 serves. So increasing it by 50% means I'm increasing that up to 4 serves per day. So if you look at this one, that would still not meet the total recommendation, but I'm trying to increase it by 50%, trying to keep this goal a realistic one. Then I'm trying to show the diet changes or the food swaps I would be doing. So these can be different from person to person, and these are the ones that I thought would work, but somebody else can do things slightly differently. So one of my goals is to lower the free sugar intake. That is one. And I'm trying to increase the vegetables. Keeping those 2 in mind, I'm going ahead. So white bread is contributing to free sugars. So I thought of swapping it, replacing it with wholemeal bread. So that is an option. So I do not change the amount. I just swapped white bread to wholemeal bread because I was concerned because one of my problems was the types of carbohydrates. Then the other one was sugar, because that's directly contributing to free sugars. I thought of cutting that down completely, but then still we have to consider that, discuss that with the client. In certain situations, they might not be happy to completely cut down the sugar because they're adding this sugar in their milk, and they might want to have sugar with some sweetness with the milk. In that situation, we might have to just reduce it by half, but in this case, I completely removed that. Then this biscuit, which is again contributing to discretionary foods and the free sugars, I haven't completely removed that for now. I've just made it half because I thought that would be more realistic. But again, as I said, there's no exact one way of doing that. So once you discuss with your client, you might be able to swap this to a more healthier option or try to reduce it by half. That depends. So in this case, I just reduce that, cut it down by half. And for pasta, I'm adding wholemeal pasta. And then coming to vegetables, carrot and spinach, she's already taking carrot and spinach. What I did was I increased the amount of it. So I increased the amount. Earlier it was 50 grams, and now I've increased it up to 100 grams, like that. Again, it depends. You might want to add other types of vegetables, other varieties, or you can simply increase the amounts. That depends. Then again, I didn't do anything for this crackers. I just left it as it is. And these ones are fine. It's apple, yogurt. And for plain muffin, which is again contributing to sugars. So I haven't completely removed that as well. So in this case, I just cut it down by half. So I'm now giving half of this muffin. Again, all white breads in this whole diet, I've replaced that with wholemeal bread. And here I've added lettuce into this one. Because yeah, lettuce would fit into this sandwich. Again, for biscuits, I've just, for this biscuit, I've replaced that with sugar-free yogurt. So there can be different ways of doing this. So this is what I thought would be better. And then I have calculated the total energy, and so I've calculated these ones once again. So let us look at the vegetable, because that was where we had an issue. So earlier it was 2, this was the previous, and now I've increased it up to 4.5 serves. So my target was to bring it up to 4 serves, because increase the vegetable intake by 50% was my target. So I've met my target. So yes. Then in terms of free sugars, I wanted to reduce 25% of it. So bringing that from 135 to 101 was my goal. And so this is the free sugars earlier one, and these are the new free sugar quantities. So I've brought it down to 97. Yes, I've reached my target once again as well. So this is how I've done that. And again, appropriate dietary strategies. You can provide the thoughts that you're feeling when you have successfully or unsuccessfully followed the nutrition intervention. And I've added some of these links that would be helpful in nutrition education in here. Then again, for nutrition counseling, you can think about other things like cognitive behavioral theories, and goal setting, maintaining food diaries. Then for coordination of care, I haven't written anything at present, but you can think of talking to the GP, updating the blood tests, and in trying to improve the physical activity if that's needed, because she's only walking 15 minutes, 15 minutes in the weekend, so that might be a consideration. Then for monitoring, yes, we can keep monitoring the gestational weight gain. She is currently in the recommended levels, and her energy intake is not that extra, but still it is good to keep an eye on the gestational weight gain to see if she's exceeding the recommended range. And for blood checks, we can keep monitoring the blood, HbA1c, or another oral glucose tolerance test. And then for clinics, we can see we can see if any change is needed for medications, to add any medications, checking with the GP. And for dietary, we need to see if she keeps adhering to the Australian Guides to Healthy Eating, because now we try to adjust that one. So we tried to increase the vegetable consumption, and we tried to reduce the free sugar consumption. So discretionary food choices. So we can see if she's adhering to that one. And other nutrients that would be important in this case would be folic acid supplementation, but that is mostly important in the first trimester. She's now in the 3rd trimester. That I've just added this one in case, because that would be a useful nutrient for a GDM case. And iodine is an important nutrient during pregnancy and breastfeeding, and can think about iron only if the iron levels are low, if we have any results with that, and omega-3 fatty acids as well. So that is the end of this. Thank you.